European Union. And not only European Union. And I really like this analysis in the context of not just how lawyers do, because lawyers sometimes, tend to concentrate just on the legal institution and the interpretation, its compliance with standards, but rather in this dynamic way. So not is just a purpose, not what is just the content of the institution and its regulation from the point of view of, let's say, constitutional human rights standards, but basically what is the general impact of the given change in different fields. So I really like this approach towards both institutional dimension of rule of law, like judiciary, but also to all different features of the environment that should be rule of law environment, like, for example, operation of free civil society or in general free speech. First of all, I would like to say that there is I think there is like one joint thing in our countries, which is approach towards the rule of law as a value. Because please note that because of the pressure by the European Union, because of starting of different procedures, pending cases, Article 7 procedure, right now the conditionality regulation, so this regulation which combines the EU budget with the compliance with the rule of law, we observe one interesting process, which is the redefinition of the rule of law, which says that allegedly in Poland and in Hungary, there is like a completely new approach towards the rule of law. Then it is up to the given state to define what the rule of law is, and that allegedly, because of our legal traditions, history, approach towards some specific values, we should have a mandate. Governments should have mandate to define and declare by themselves what is rule of law. So it is interesting that Polish Prime Minister, at certain point, like more or less in November 2020, when there was this, peak of the negotiations concerning EU budget, started to use the phrase so-called rule of law. So that was like one strategy. Second strategy, there is no clear definition. So please give me a definition. What is rule of law? It is not in treaties. You have just this general statement about European values, and within this you have rule of law, but there is no definition. So that's why, we cannot be bound by this value, by this European value, because it means transferring too much of power to the European Union, and they will penalize us for something we don't know for what we are going to be compliant with. And so that was like one strategy. And it seems to me that this approach was kind of similar in terms of both Viktor Orban and Morawiecki, Kaczyński, and so also Minister of Justice, Mr. Ziobro. So I would say like closely Polish ruling elite. The second point connected with this is, okay, they are talking about rule of law, but it is not really about this because they frame it under the umbrella of some bigger problems, which means that they are going to impose on us all those other European values. So be beware of this. It is not so much about legal protection, it is about LGBT rights or other values that are somehow foreign to our tradition and our history. So we are just talking about this, but in fact, the whole fuss is about those LGBT zones that have been, those resolutions that have been passed by local governments in Poland, and all those other actions by the Polish, via which the European Union would like to have some impact on issues connected with tradition, Christianity, religion, and basically we are those defenders of those traditional values here, and that's why we cannot allow for this to happen. And please note that 5 years ago, the same discourse would be not about LGBT rights, but about migration. So, so any interference by the European Union or other international partners and any discussion on this would be interpreted as being a challenge from the point of view of some other domestic policies. And basically, I can only agree with Jan Werner Miller, who published once an article that this whole argumentation based on this so-called reference to tradition, religion, and this defense of values in societies like this is really about covering corruption and cronyism. And in fact, even if you observe the daily reality in Poland, you see how much, and especially in the pandemic right now, you see a lot of problems connected with so-called discriminatory legalism and lack of equality before the law. So depending, who is protesting, for example, in the context of the coronavirus, if you are, if you are somebody who is skeptic to the vaccination, then most usually you are connected with the right side of the political scene, which means that the government will be kind of silent towards any demonstration you will organize. So there will be almost no interference. But if you represent women's strike, so if you are fighting for women's rights in the context of the recent judgment of the Constitutional Court, then immediately you will be spotted by the police, arrested, and all. Maybe not everybody will be arrested, but immediately some sanctions will be imposed on you. So that is like the first point. Second point, I think that both countries, Poland and Hungary, they are not just cooperating at the EU level, but they are sharing best practices. So there is a very strong coalition of values between Polish and Hungarian government. And please note, in the second part of the last year, there was this initiative to establish this Polish-Hungarian Institute on the Rule of Law. So that was quite amazing endeavor that both countries try to create a think tank that would be responsible for making an alternative explanation of things. And obviously, because you are in both countries, you have a huge access to media that are dependent on you, either public media or the media that are sponsored by you via different ways. In Poland, it is achieved via advertisements in state-owned companies. Obviously, you can achieve an effect of legitimation of your view on the rule of law. So this, I didn't see much of progress in this, maybe because there are some problems within the ruling coalition in Poland, and maybe those who would be responsible for this do not have the same impact on the international policy of Poland and the relations with Hungary. And maybe that is the reason why this institute was not visible yet. But I think it is quite interesting example that we are not just going to talk different languages about rule of law, but also will create some additional academic or quasi-academic explanation to this. I think it is interesting. And second, it is we see that in Poland there is a lot of import of different methods how to dismantle independent institutions, including especially courts, like the most standard case. And I remember that Judge Baka was, when he was in Poland, he was more or less like warning us concerning this, was this shorter age for retirement of judges. So the idea that was in fact implemented in Poland with respect to the judges of the Supreme Court, that they have been pushed to earlier retirement, and the retirement age has been changed from 70 to 65, and only because of the intervention by Timmermans, by the Commission, and later on by the Court of Justice of the European Union, 20 of those judges could come back to adjudicate cases. But basically, it was like very much similar method as Viktor Orban did in 2012-13, more or less. So that kind of approach is very much similar, and and of course it does not apply just to building, just to reforming or deforming some specific institutions, but it is also a part of the bigger endeavor. So it is about creating some kind of a system of competitive authoritarianism. So, you know, I have this standard book here, Competitive Authoritarianism. You probably know it. And we have a lot of features of this already. And I think that the big difference between Poland and Hungary, if I may say so, right now, is that we are not so much fighting for autonomy, but we are, I think, still fighting, that is my feeling at least, that is my hope, that we are still fighting for islands of pluralism that will give us a chance to have more or less fair elections, more or less fair upcoming elections in 2023. But please note, I would like to underline, we are fighting for islands of pluralism. So those places where you will not just keep your, let's say, professional dignity and the way some spaces that you will be able to express your free speech and make just you'll have a chance to exercise your political rights and freedoms. But I mean islands of pluralism, because in my opinion, we are already competitive authoritarian system, but still I think we are in this moment that I see some, you know, chances of getting out of this situation. And when Zoltán has mentioned my institution, you are right that I'm one of this very last independent guardians of values of liberal democracy and human rights in Poland. And it is quite interesting that today there was going to be a hearing on my case, and the Constitutional Court was going to, you know, I don't have doubt, you know, what would be the result of my case. So the case would be about whether I can still serve in interim period until the moment of appointment of the new ombudsman. And today the Constitutional Court has postponed the case, and I received this information at around 10 o'clock. The hearing was going to take place at 1 o'clock, and it happened for the 9th time. Okay, can you imagine? 9 times the Constitutional Court was delaying the hearing of my case. So basically, I'm serving like in this kind of a very unstable situation for last half a year. Why? Because there is no willingness to appoint a new ombudsman in some kind of a compromise fashion. But why we have this situation? Because the Senate of the Polish Republic is also still independent institution. So because we have the one mandate, so-called one mandate system of choosing Polish senators, we have independent, we have the Senate which is controlled by the opposition. So it gives you this feeling that you are still having some kind of a pluralism, despite the fact that media, for example, are more and more subordinated with the use of money of state-owned powerful companies. So I would like to add that I think it is interesting to look at the civil society. You know, one of the big differences between us is, I think, approach towards Norwegian funds, because as I understand, effectively, it was not possible to block. Effectively, it was not possible to get independent access to Norwegian funds in Hungary. In Poland, we learned with your example, and there was a huge, massive action by the civil society not to allow the government to put a hand on Norwegian funds. And that's why we have right now, we are right now at the start of the series of different projects, independent projects that are financed out of the Norwegian money. But I think that with civil society, the difference is a little bit this, that we have extremely powerful leaders of the civil society, especially charity leaders, people who are having trust at the level of 85, 88% in a society with huge powerful structures. So for example, One of such names is Mr. Jerzy Owsiak, who is every year organizing like a big charity event with more or less 50 million euro collected every year in this charity. To that extent, he's so popular to that extent that even the President of the Republic is giving some gifts to this charity. And whenever there was any attempt to regulate civil society, to impose any restrictions, there was immediately counterattack. And it was not possible to restrict activities of civil society. But those activities are restricted by other means, not by regulatory means, but by actions. And the pandemic helps in this. So, for example, after the judgment of the Constitutional Court, there were a lot of demonstrations in Poland, really massive demonstrations, and the government has perfectly used this state of exceptionality and laws that are prohibiting them holding demonstrations in open areas. And after a series of legal actions, but also brutality by the police, it was very much impossible to, it was quite risky to demonstrate at all. And also, you know, we see, and it is in my opinion like a new phenomenon, it is the emergence of SLAPP litigation. So strategic lawsuit against public participation litigation, against activists, against women protesters, against opinion makers, you know, such people like Professor Wojciech Sadurski, like a very famous constitutional scholar. He's having 4 cases altogether. Can you imagine that public television has sued me as a civil servant for my statements, which shows you the climate of things. So so basically, all different actions against judges, against prosecutors, civil servants, opinion makers, journalists are made not only with regulatory means, but with just exercise of the power. And if you have access to unlimited amount of money, if you also sponsor organizations, some foundations that are governmentally friendly, that are doing later on strategic lawsuits against public participation litigation against you, then you can also achieve this effect of chilling people and restricting their freedom of speech. So just to, you know, I wouldn't like to take too much of time, but I think that for sure what happens is that the state of exceptionality, we do not have this official state of emergency, but we have plenty of different regulations that regulate our way of behavior, and obviously they are used in a discriminatory fashion towards opponents of the government. And you know, I have hundreds of cases in my docket, you know, with whom I'm dealing on everyday basis, and it seems, you know, that they have those actions achieve the effect. Just one last point I would like to say, that please note that if the government is using that kind of measures, and if the space for discussion for civil society is shrinking, then at the end of the day, you start to quarrel with each other without this space which is remained free. So, for example, it is quite interesting that within different opposition movements, you can feel that there are all the time different discussions and quarrels. But interestingly, if you analyze the other 55–60% of the public debate, then there is just one governmental message. So I think that this the limitation of this space for open discussion, civil society, and for competition between political parties is creating like at the same time like additional problem for the opposition, because in such a situation it is much more difficult for you to unite around values. It is much more difficult to be together on discussion on some basic issues in a society, future of Poland, and you know, or concerning future elections. So I think it is a very interesting phenomenon, because on this other governmental side, the message is simply one and very unified. This message is transmitted from the central political camp to the public television, and then amplified by different dependent media outlets, and over the time, a number of those media outlets is increasing. And so I think we should have also in mind this phenomenon. Last point, because it is a big part of this report by you, autonomy of universities. Of course, there is a pressure, but still, it seems they try to keep independence, and but even if they do it, you simply start to experience something like a chilling effect. Okay, so there are certain topics you will not take on agenda at the university. So you will be careful with talking about political issues. You will be careful about talking on LGBT rights, on women's rights. So it does not mean that you will not be able to make a research, but making a conference, making a seminar is giving you already a situation that you must have, some second thoughts about it. So a little bit like a self-censorship, even at biggest universities. So even at Warsaw University or Jagiellonian University, at other universities, you would not touch it at all, because you are so dependent in terms of your future as a university or as an academic professor, that simply you would somehow be a little bit careful in making too much of noise around yourself. So that is how I feel it these days, how it works. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Adam. It's really a very informative and important introduction to our common problems, and I especially thank for the idea of the authoritarian model making by Polish and Hungarian intellectuals, which is a kind of betrayal of the intellectuals and the serious crisis of the constitutional values made by lawyers and high intellectuals in Hungarian and Polish scene. And thank you for the idea of or the questions about the strategies of keeping our freedoms. As you said, islands of pluralism. We feel we feel ourselves in islands, and these islands are shrinking continuously. But the next stage of this workshop probably will find some new questions and answers for keeping islands of pluralism and keeping autonomies, dealing with such questions as what should judges or journalists or students or civil activists do against authoritarian temptations and authoritarian forces, because we are speaking a lot about what should do European institutions against authoritarian member states, but we must be concentrated on the inner forces of democracy and autonomy. So I just invite three of my colleagues, László Majtényi, Ágnes Kovács, and Domonkos Lázár, and our three guests, András Baka, Miklós Haraszti, and Nóra Aujeszky. And please try to reflect the words of Adam and try to give us some insight to the problems of autonomies in courthouses, universities, and media. So I just give the floor firstly to our colleagues. Probably we can start with the discussion, András Baka and Ágnes Kovács. But I just invite you in this friendly meeting, just interrupt us and try to reflect each other somehow. So it is a part of this workshop which is more open than as usual. So Ágnes, please.
Okay, good afternoon for everyone, and I will be very brief. I have the privilege to introduce the next topic and the next speaker. We dedicated a paper or a chapter for judicial independence, and I would like to ask and again welcome András Baka, who is a former Justice of the European Court of Human Rights and the former President of the Supreme Court of Hungary, to share his opinion and thoughts about the current situation in Hungary in terms of judicial independence, and hopefully we will hear about his opinion on what are those issues that are most pressing in Hungary within the judiciary, and what have been the most worrisome developments in the recent years, and what he thinks about how judicial independence can be protected and who should protect actually judicial independence. So first I would give the floor to András Baka, and then we can gather questions afterwards.
Yes, thank you very much for the organizers for my invitation, for inviting me to this, taking part on this meeting. Well, first of all, I'm very grateful to you to be able to share views about our common problems and our common situation. I read very carefully the study which was produced by the Karl Institution about judicial independence, and I have to admit that I share the main points and the main points of this study, even if I have a certain reservation on certain points. I share the main lines and its conclusion. I don't have time, as the organizers told me to be, well, I have approximately 10-15 minutes, if I understood well, and I don't have time to go into the very details of the topic, but right at the beginning, I would like to emphasize that I see a lot of common, but the common between the situation of Poland and Hungary, and Adam Bodnar strengthened my opinion in this respect. I think there are a lot of common concerning the Hungarian and Polish judiciary, and it was obvious even at the time when I was participated in the first Congress of the Polish judges in 2016, I think in September 2016. I really, he remembered well. I mean, Adam remembers very well. I think that I warned the Polish judges not to follow the Hungarian way and try to resist the governmental intervention in this respect. Unfortunately, it didn't happen there, and it is getting very serious here, I think, in Hungary. Which is more serious? I mean, we can argue on that. At the beginning, I think it was the Hungarian case was more serious. The Hungarian intervention the governmental intervention to the judiciary was more serious and very drastic. I just would like to remember the participants to the time when there was a drastic lowering the retirement age of the judges. I think it was an unprecedented intervention into the life of the judiciary in Hungary. It was a shocking experience, and I think this shocking experience is still with us and still within the judiciary. Well, after this very short introduction, I would like to move to some of the more general points. And first of all, I would like to emphasize that there is no rule of law. Consequently, there is no judicial independence in countries where there is no separation of powers. I think separation of powers is the sine qua non of rule of law, and judicial independence goes hand in hand together. And in countries where separation of powers doesn't exist, there is no rule of law, and there is no independent judiciary. I think this is the start. This should be the starting point. I just would like to quote Antonin Scalia, who was the most conservative judge of the U.S. Supreme Court, and he said that and he wrote the following: "What sets the United States apart from other countries, not the Bill of Rights, which every banana republic has, but the separation of powers." I think it expresses, depicts very well that separation of powers is a key element of rule of law and judicial independence. Of course, in Hungary, there is no separation of powers. Even the notion of separation of power is denied by high-level officials. So they say there is no separation of power. They got the power directly from the electors, and so this power is not shared. So this is very much alive in the practice. I mean, you can see that in Britain or in the United States, the executive, the prime minister is fighting with parliament. I mean, it's a very good example, the Brexit and the fight between prime minister and parliament and the parliament. And there are several examples from the American model too. Right now, here in Hungary, we have the power of the prime minister, and he has the full administration, and the parliament is just an obedient tool to support his ideas and his interest. So under these circumstances, it is not surprising that the ruling autocratic power would like systematically impose by all means decisive influence on the judiciary. And during the last couple of years, during the last 10 years, we have seen several examples like that. Pensioning of the judges, early pensioning of the judges was one of these examples, and lowering the retirement age resulted that a great number of judges had to leave office, and their vacant positions were immediately filled up with newcomers, with new judges who were presumably by the government, more loyal to them, and this was the first attempt and the first very radical step, but it was not the only one. They centralized the model of court administration. I mean, previously we had a self-run court administration. Of course, it was not ideal, but even the worst self-run or self-governmental court administration is better than a politically motivated or an organization which is under political pressure. But nevertheless, they introduced a new centralized model and a highly centralized judicial administration with new politically appointed president. It was Madame Hando. I think the study characterized her very well. And with extremely long mandate and extremely wide jurisdiction, especially on the area of appointments of judges to higher judicial positions. The same is happening now when we have a new Supreme Court president, and when he was only an idea in the head of the government. I mean, they realized that he did not fulfill the requirements, the legal requirements to become elected as president of the Supreme Court, the Curia. So they immediately modified the relevant rules of qualification to be able him to fit to the position. So it's a clear political appointment. It was a clear political appointment, and with all of its consequences. I would like to emphasize that when I talked about the separation of powers, I think if you take a look at the different powers, the legislation, the government, the administration, and the judiciary, I think each state powers has its function and his tool. The different powers, like the legislation, is setting the legal framework of a country. I think is the government has the executive and also the financial power to do things in a country, and the judiciary has a freedom, and this is the main feature of the judiciary. The judiciary has the possibility and the power to interpret the legal rules, the applicable legal rules, which are applicable in a concrete situation and in a concrete case. It is not surprising that the government is trying to block this free judicial interpretation, and this is what I think is missing from the study, that the basic element of the judicial work is legal interpretation, and this is the main arm of the judiciary, to be able to interpret applicable rules, and the government tries to change, to take away this arm from the judiciary. They do it by two ways. One is to change the judges by different means. I mean, by appointment, by lowering the retirement age, and so on. And there is a second element. By legal means, they try to reduce the interpreting power of the judiciary, and taking away the very essence of the judiciary. And this is already in the Constitution, on the basic rule. The Article 28 of the Basic Rule of Hungary says that about the interpretation, when interpreting the fundamental law or laws, it shall be presumed that they serve moral and economic purposes which are in accordance with common sense and the public good. It means that it's no matter what kind of rule is enacted by the parliament, whether it is moral or immoral, whether it serves economic purpose of, common economic purpose or not. I mean, it has to be, this act has to be interpreted as a moral one. It has to be interpreted which has common sense behind it. And this was the first restriction of the possibility of the power to interpret judgments by the judges. Of course, there are other means to restrict the interpretation of the judges. That the other means is the government, the parliament and the government produces very, very extremely detailed legal rules, which leaves very little possibility for the judges to interpret. Very narrow area for interpretation. And I think, and whenever the judge produces a judgment which is not convenient, which is very uncomfortable for the government, I mean, there is already, or a new legal rule comes out and tries to diminish, to cut back the scope of the legal interpretation, even if this restriction imposed to the judges is against international legal norms or against the judgments of the European Court of Human Rights. This is the area, and well, I'm referring here to the area where public figures can be criticized. Public figures should bear more, should take more criticism than the normal people and normal people. But and this is very, very obvious from the case law of the European Court of Human Rights. It is very obvious that the legal intervention on this area is running fully against the standards of the European Court of Human Rights. And there is another element, and this is the newest one. When I appointed the new Supreme Court president, at the same time they introduced a so-called conformity procedure. Conformity procedure is mentioned in the study. Conformity procedure is a legal procedure of the Supreme Court. And if there is a conformity complaint, goes to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, the president of the Supreme Court, the newly elected president of the Supreme Court, choose the judges who are going to sit in the panel of the conformity panels. And in the end of the process, I mean, this conformity panel produces compulsory judgments for the local courts, for the lower level courts, and this is a serious limitation to the interpretational possibility of the judges and the judiciary, taking away the very essence of the judiciary. Well, this is what I wanted to say. I also would like to say that there are, if you compare the Polish and the Hungarian situation, of course, I see the Polish situation, the Hungarian situation is very serious, but for the moment, I think Polish one is probably even more serious, concerning and more endangered. The judicial power and the judiciary is more endangered than Hungary. In Hungary, there is a step-by-step process to no, and we are moving on. I mean, the government is moving on a hidden way to impose its power to the judiciary. In Poland, this is more obvious. This is more visible. But fortunately enough, of course, there are differences too. And the difference is in favor of the Polish colleagues. I saw in 2016, and since that I have seen it. There is a much stronger civil society in Poland. So when I was there, and since that I saw demonstrations for the judiciary, and I think it's very important to be able to see this even if it is weak, even if we are not satisfied with that, it's not strong enough according to us, but nevertheless it exists. In Hungary, there is no such a thing. There is no one who is raising their voice, who are raising their voice for the judiciary. There is even the judges. I think after the lowering the retirement age and forcing members of the judiciary to leave, high-level officials of the judiciary to leave, I think it was on purpose. It was to silence the judges, to silence the society. That it was a warning. So there are differences between the Hungarian and Polish situations, but what is true for both of the countries, I think there is no rule of law. There is no independent judiciary, or less and less independent judiciary in both countries, and I think I have a feeling sometimes that we are simply not fitting into the framework of the European Union, of the civilized world. We are talking about human rights. I mean, the government talks about human rights, but and creating a constitution, human rights institute or something like that. I mean, it has nothing to do with human rights. It is a completely different notion. I mean, the Strasbourg decisions are not respected. I mean, it's a Soros business. It's a liberal business. European Union Court, the Union Court and the Strasbourg Court are just tools of the liberal life and trying to oppress us. I mean, it's just hopeless. I mean, I don't know where we are now, and where we are going, and where we are heading to. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm ready to answer if you wish so. If you have any questions, or we can discuss things. Thank you very much.
No, thank you, András, and your thoughts about the free interpretation and separation of powers are really very important. And for the next topic is also a good starting point, because the media freedom is also a question of separation of power, and journalists as power holders of a free society, and the interpretation of the facts and values toward this society is a big task of free journalism. So please, László, just start the discussion with Miklós in this topic.
Thank you very much. Have a nice afternoon. Introducing Miklós Haraszti is easy here because he's a well-known public figure in my homeland. To tell the truth, when I first read his name, that time he was a poet. If I remember it, I was a student of the grammar school when I read his poets, probably in the monthly újírás. It's true, Miklós. I'm not absolutely sure. So Miklós was writer. He was journalist, sociologist, professor of university in the Central European University. He wrote a very exciting book. It was the title of, when he was very young, The Peace Rate of Wage. His behavior was very similar what later did Günther Wahraff. He went to a factory as a worker and wrote a very interesting book about it. And at the same time, he was one of the leaders of the democratic opposition. He was the person, he formulated the Kádár must go slogan for a claim in the time of the party state. He was accused by the Attorney General, accused by crime, and he was one of the leaders of the Liberal Party, the Free Democrats, after the transition, and he held the position of the representative of the media freedom of OSCE, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. And if you don't mind, and if you feel like it to answer, dear Miklós, I asked some questions to you. The first is, what do you think about the idea that the level of the press freedom alone can determine a country's place on a democracy, autocracy scale? This would be the first question. The second is, but how do you like? So you don't oblige to answer the question. The second is, what is your opinion on the media decision of the Hungarian Constitutional Court in 2010, in which stated the peripheral elements of the regulation as unconstitutional, but did not judge the central problem. It was a very interesting decision of the Hungarian Constitutional Court. The third question is, what do you think about the Youngland Compromise? Is the Council of Europe responsible for the destroying Hungarian press freedom or not? It was very interesting because there were a very heated debate between the Council of Europe experts and the Hungarian government, and the result was a very peaceful compromise. And probably the extremely difficult question is, the last question is, what do you think about the perspectives of press freedom in Hungary? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. Thank you for the very good written stuff that the Institute presented, including László's study, which is coming from a very authentic pen, because he used to be actually the official supervisor of the Hungarian media scene in a previous iteration of today's totally empowered media council, which was the ORTT, the National
Yes.
And he, in an unprecedentedly moral way, in a morally heated action, he gave up his position because of immoral inter-party dealing among the Fidesz and the socialist delegates in the council about frequency allocation. Actually, something that was very bad, but was far not as bad as what we have today, which is monopoly. So a duopoly, you can argue, is still better, but poor Laszlo, how could he have seen that in advance, that even worse times are coming? So the point is, to his first question, I fully agree, and I especially agree when it comes to what Adam called the competitive autocracy or hybrid state or illiberal state or mafia state. So what we are all facing here in Poland and Hungary and in Central Europe, because it's not by chance that the First Amendment type rights are getting under attack first. When the political will arrives to transform our democracies into one of those, but basically into a modern quasi-democratic variation of all the more successful attempts at monopolization and centralization of power, and very much to the topic of the whole event today, annihilation of autonomies in society. Both in Poland and in Hungary, that was the very first thing. In Hungary, it was so early that it was less than 1 month after, in 2010, in a landslide election, Fidesz took power. Less than 1 month, the so-called media package, this thick body of legal text was put on the table of parliament by a backbencher, not by the government, in order to avoid the law about lawmaking and avoid parliamentary debate. And that already decided about the total monopolization of power in the hands of media council, which we still enjoy today. And same in Poland. It was the public television that was first attacked when the government, inspired by Mr. Kaczynski, started to try to eliminate media autonomy. I have one modification here. In the media world, when it comes to free speech, the equivalent of separation of powers, I would rather call pluralism. Even as it is unprecedented in regular democracies, in proper democracies, that you have a practically state-owned media empire, not even just one. And of course, all these public TVs, public radios have been practically transformed into state media. But even if we set that apart, what would care for the basic needs of a democracy, which otherwise in the institutional world would be separation of powers, is not a formal separation, because the media is not a formal power, but it is pluralism in a very specific sense. When many people make the mistake when talking about pluralism as if it were simply variety. No, it is a multi-centered state of media. That's the basic issue here. Having a media which is not varied because you have glossy paper and because you have monthlies and because you have TVs and because you have radios and you have all those genres of media, but because they are multi-centered, both proprietor in ways of who owns them, and of course, very importantly, in terms of information, like coming from different important or operated or influenced by different important centers of public opinion, of political force, of sociology, and many, many divides that are imaginable in a free society. And that is totally gone. That is totally gone in Hungary, with the except of the so-called independent media. I'm hesitating, László, whether answer yes, let me answer your questions first, very briefly, because the second question, I believe, about the Constitutional Court and the Jagland compromise are both about the same. They both left intact the essence of the media order that has been set up by the media package, which was the one-party character of the authority that supervises media, that distributes licenses, that de-licenses, that punishes, that regulates. And there are many, many, many more questions there, not just the one-party character of that authority, but the total power and the total intransparency of that power. But the issue is that I don't consider, this is a somewhat negative answer to your question, I don't consider them decisive. But what I consider decisive is the political will at eliminating autonomy in society. And they missed both the Constitutional Court of Hungary, which at that time was still not absolutely the creation of Viktor Orbán, and of Council of Europe, which was created to have this supervisory, advisory role. They missed the opportunity to at least allude, to at least judge, to at least condemn this one-party character, which was a major step away from rule of law, from autonomies-based free society, and actually led to an annihilation of a list of human rights in Hungary. So we cannot, as actually Zoltán has stressed, it is our role here in Hungary to put an end to this, but the role of the international and domestic supervisory bodies is very crucial. And if they miss the opportunity, then that's a huge missed opportunity. So let me, at the end, reflect to your question about the future, what could be done. The point I would like to stress, talking about the fate of autonomy in the media world, and totally agreeing with László's point that it's absolutely decisive. Actually, we Hungarians know that Sándor Petőfi, the famous poet, already made that point in his famous poem that he wrote to the very fresh Hungarian parliament, the first free parliament in Hungary after 1848, and he dedicated his poem to the question. He said, ruin everything, ruin absolutely everything what we wish to have, what the people would like to have. But if we have freedom of speech, we would rebuild absolutely everything from the scratch, and that's a very early and very considerate opinion about László's question. So my point is,
sorry, Miklós, just sorry, it's a very unpolite interruption, but Adam signed to me that he must go away, but he just wanted to say something at the end, and after that we will continue your logic. Sorry for that.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
I'm very sorry, but I have some other tasks and responsibilities in connection with this today's hearing that didn't take place of the Constitutional Court. And I'm very sorry to Mr. Haraszti for interrupting, but I will, if we are talking about poetry, then I would like to give you some notice that a great Polish poet has just died this week, Adam Zagajewski. So he passed away on Monday. And it is our great loss because he was really one of those really big names in the world of poetry. He was regarded as one of the candidates to the Nobel Prize, but Olga Tokarczuk got it. So that's why most probably there was no sufficient number of places for Zagajewski. But so I really like this comment about Shandopetofi, and I will look into those poems because I think it is important to refer to those values that are shared by poetry because they kind of precede or analyze, what is happening in our societies. But just my last, my like short comment. I would like to say that I really like this report, and I think this is really a very important report for our countries. And I would like just to make a declaration that I would love to make an event with maybe some Polish think tank about your report, just to discuss it with some Polish commentators, Polish speakers, and just to share some experiences and views on this report, because it seems to me that we should think about those basically strategies that are implemented in both countries, and especially if you have such a great analysis of it, I think it would be losing a chance not to get into this. So let me give this promise that I will be in contact with Zoltán regarding organization of some joint event on this issue. Maybe it will. I think like the good place to make it. We have such an NGO which is called Oświatyńskie Archives. So this is an NGO created on the basis of the heritage of Wiktor Oświatyński. Everybody, Wiktor well, who was closely connected with CU. And with George Soros, obviously, and basically it is the place for, I think, for a discussion about those issues. So let me promise that I will be in contact with Zoltán on this, and that we'll continue discussion on this great report. And once again, thank you very much and congratulations on making it, because we must be together in those difficult times. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam, for being here and for your help to discuss these serious problems. And we are very glad hearing that you will share this project and this work for Polish friends, because the only hope is a kind of forming a democratic and rule of law cooperation. So please share, and we really promise you that we will cooperate with Polish friends. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Have a good discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry,
thank you, Adam. Thank you.
Just continue the media freedom problems. Sorry.
Yes, thank you so much. So I would like to give another type of argument, another type of basis for László's point about the eminent importance of media freedom in a democracy, in a rule of law, and even, as he put it, a kind of force of characterization of that any kind of given system based on whether they have media pluralism or not. The issue is that the Polish and Hungarian type of bodying autocracy, the aim that the leading political will in these two countries are aiming at.
Na, pont a Miklós.
is actually as Adam already put it, is an electoral autocracy. It is an elective autocracy, meaning unlike communism, unlike a simple dictatorship, the junta type in older Latin America, sometimes today in Africa, these states, these type of illiberal states must perpetuate the power, and they do it by elections, and elections are won by propaganda. So it is absolutely important for them to have a media system that, even if it is not based on total state ownership of means of communication and is not based on state employment of the communicators, as communism used to be, nevertheless, they can produce practically the same effect by keeping an electoral basis, which is, of course, then later on is already sufficient for them to maintain their power, because they change everything if they have the power to do so. So what's the logic of this? What's the absolutely common thread, the common denominator here? First, it always starts with a populist persuasion of biggest part or the biggest minority, so to say, of the electorate by a populist gain, by a populist opinion, populist grab of popularity, actually. Based on that, they would grab power, and then grabbing power would later serve for them as further directing public opinion, at least of that particular electoral base on which their power is based in, which is applied again and again, and so you have a constant seesaw of popularity grab, power grab, and popularity grab and power grab. So these systems are based actually on the persuasive propaganda, and it is a mistake to believe, like liberals actually in both countries sometimes like to believe, that it is a kind of propaganda for the whole of the electorate. No, it is only to keep the narrow-minded two-bit propaganda items of the base in order to produce and reproduce electoral successes. Now, what is these states are made of is based on the populist persuasion of the part of the electorate. Then these are, when you're already in power, do you remember the time when, back 10 years ago, when the whole Europe believed the populists cannot govern? That was long ago. So the point is, these are joined by quasi-rule of law operations of the state and quasi-market compatible operations of oligarchs of the state. And then what the state adds to this composite is restrictive, institutional, legal, administrative, financial, ownership, licensing, advertising, and punitive regulations of the media. And then it is paired with government-aided private media acquisitions. Government-aided private media acquisitions. This is the quasi-market market-compatible component of the thing. And all these measures, of course, are employed in combination, devised purposefully to starve pluralism, political diversity, namely political diversity in the media. And then via this, sustain the government's practical monopoly on messaging. A free way, a green light to message whatever they want for the base, for the political base. Now, all this is not new, I have to tell you, because as a media representative of OSCE, for almost 10 years, I had to struggle with this phenomenon in Russia and in the post-Soviet space. Of course, there is still, being part of the European Union, it still does make a difference in comparison to these post-Soviet variations of illiberalism, because in Orban's system or in the Kaczynski-inspired system, existential intimidation is more or less limited to menace of joblessness and delicensing for media, revenue loss, bureaucratic harassment, and the more direct forms, more dictatorial, as they like to say, forms of bullying, such as journalistic offenses punished by prison or bogus criminalization for drug abuse or tax abuse, or outright violence up to killing of journalists is, thanks God, is missing. And this is due to the fact that Poland, Hungary are in the European Union. And of course, the constant discrimination against independent media outlets and independent journalists is on the agenda, and there is no difference. So let me very briefly describe the result of this illiberal nation-state building, let's call it this way. I would say that the print press in Hungary, I would restrict myself to Hungary. The print press is completely taken. Generally speaking, the legacy media, the old media, is totally taken with very few exceptions. Print press totally, with the exception of one national print paper, which despite its rarity value, the circulation is not very big, I must say. I'm talking about Népszava. That in television, it is the last outposts that are under siege, with the exception of one German old nationwide commercial TV, the RTL Club is practically taken, and with one exception of one cable TV, ATV. Radio is a surprisingly huge victory for Viktor Orban's system. Nobody really cares about it, although it is at least as decisive as the total takenness of other genres of media, because in Hungary, in a very innovative way, I must say, even music radios have become tool of the propaganda effort, and there is, with the fall of Club Radio, now there is absolutely no difference. It's totally taken. What they do in music radios, they are given practically free a 2-minute news block from the same media authority or the same producers of the media authority. And that means that people who listen to music radio while driving or while shopping or while doing housework are totally washed again and again by state propaganda. Now, I would have to go on and say that the second most important medium of elections, which is the public posters, are again absolutely totally taken by the state, totally. Ugye this is the moment when we cry out to Europe, don't you see this? Because we are somehow inside the fog of this very typical media war of the state against society, and we don't see the enormosity of this level of takenness of all media, and so on. And as Mr. Baka has put it very importantly, the regular courts, paradoxically in Hungary, are the last outposts sometimes of defense of journalistic freedoms by still applying the crucial notion of public interest information. And public interest information, which is the crux, the most important defense of when it comes to punitive measures against actual freedom of speech, when the limits of what you can utter in public are endangered, then the role of regular courts is still somewhat important in Hungary. I'm not sure Mr. Baka would be able to say whether also on the second level and on the courier level, but the regular courts are still standing tall. And so what remained? Practically online. And even the online world is being already endangered and by the two biggest portal sites in Hungary are already taken by oligarchs. One word about tactics, which is very important comparison with Poland, because lately, very lately, Poland has started to copy this Hungarian way. The media council, the media authority, was the ruler of the monopolization fight until 2014 in Hungary. Then Viktor Orbán changed to the Putin way, which is the oligarchic way, and this is what is lately the buyouts, which is lately copied in Poland. In Hungary, the main method was not buying media for state-owned companies, as it has been now copied in Poland, but seemingly private oligarchs were given state bank money. So the line was like this: Orbán orders state banks to lend money to chosen oligarchs. Oligarchs buy up media which was made cheap by the work of parliament, by regulations of media council, which made them loss-making and which drove away from the country practically all foreign owners of media. And then when the oligarchs buy it up, then surprise, Orbán Viktor, after the 2018 election, his third electoral victory, which because of his infamous electoral law was still landing in a two-thirds parliament, despite the fact that the smaller part of the electorate voted for him. Practically the majority of the electorate voted to remove Viktor Orbán from power, but the illiberal electoral law resulted again in a constitutional majority in Hungary for Orbán. So this constitutional majority again works, and when the oligarchs have already practically everything that they wanted, which is providing them the list of media which I just did, then they surprise, almost communism-like, united into a conglomerate, the called Central European Media, Press and Media, for some reason, Press and Media Foundation. 1 week later, after the voluntary donation of these great value media, voluntary for free donation for this foundation, Viktor Orbán personally issues a decree which names, which elevates this foundation to a national strategic importance, which by otherwise Viktor Orbán made laws, means in Hungary today that they are exempt from competition scrutiny, they are exempt from actually media council scrutiny. And I would like to see, I haven't seen yet, whether they would pay taxes. It's quite possible they wouldn't even pay taxes because their status is considered non-profit. So the point is that we have now a totally dichotomic media world in Hungary. Very, very interestingly, we have total censorship and total lack of freedom of speech inside the state-owned, or the state-dominated, or the oligarchic domain. More severe, actually, than it used to be under the real state-owned media empire of János Kádár. In János Kádár's existed the three T's, the tolerated type of opinion, the supported type of opinion, and the suppressed type of opinion. That was an official policy of János Kádár. We don't have it inside Kesma. We don't have it inside public TV. We have as severe censorship and total propaganda as it used to be before Kádár, actually, before Kádár, before the 1956 revolution. And we have an independent, very fragile world, the fora of which are taken by the day away by these combined policies of state power, or state regulation, media regulation, and oligarchic buyout. So that's where we are today, and the result of all this is that, strangely and unnoticed by Europe and unnoticed by the democratic world, and unnoticed actually practically by the larger Hungarian society, because of the persuasion and the successful way of this propaganda, that we have practically a totalitarian type propaganda world in the majority of the media, and that media is what informs the electoral choice of a very important electoral basis. Hannah Arendt, when she described what is totalitarian propaganda, said that that totalitarians give up on argumentation, they build a reality, and then they only finger point to that built reality. And that's what totalitarian propaganda is. And Viktor Orbán, just like Putin before, just like all Central Asian illiberal dictators, and just like Kaczynski tries to arrange it in Poland today, they proved that the totalitarian propaganda model and censorship model and lack of plurality model can be reproduced in a multi-party setting and in a multi-owner setting. And that's such an enormous development, totally unnoticed in all parts of the world where it should be noticed, where the noticing of this would make a difference, that should make us timid about the future. But back to László's question, we are not, okay? Because we have Nóra Aujeszky with us, and because have the brave examples of civil society and all those other brave people like the journalists of Telex, who used to be Index, when Orbán Viktor's propaganda state has taken away the largest online portal in Hungary, which was Index, their previous domain. So these brave people prove that the younger generations are waking up of this fog fog of this step-by-step take away of their freedoms, and they reproduce, sorry to be so egotistic to say, and they reproduce what the Polish and the Hungarian and the Czechoslovak democratic opposition did vis-a-vis the earlier iteration of this monopolization. We don't care. We just speak freely. We just reproduce free speech. We just don't give in to any kind of self-censorship, even at loss of our jobs, even at loss of what used to be in our dreams the benefit of having a democracy, which is proper job for those who have a profession. So I believe that together with the developments in the party world in Hungary, the parties too seem to have started, so to say, to realize that they first have to take electoral power, and they have to take it together, because fragmentation only serves monopolization on the other side. So maybe that will produce the necessary political change, which then will, I strongly believe, which very quickly result, here Zoltán Fleck and László Majtényi and Mr. Baka are the rulers of the legal universe, which must very quickly and in a quasi-revolutionary way, I strongly believe, result in reinstatement of pluralism, of a proper, in our case, more proportionate electoral law and the new constitution. Thank you so much so far.
Thank you very much, Miklós, for the invitation for this historical task, and thank you also for bridge this topic to the next, because here we have Nóra, who was a student and belongs to another generation as our colleague Domokos, and I have high hopes for this generation to build a new future. So the place is yours.
Thank you so much. Welcome you all. My name is Miklós Haraszti. I am a researcher at the OSCE Institute. I'm one of the authors of the chapter on the fight for university autonomy. And first of all, let me introduce Nóra Aujeszky in short again. Nóra is a jurist, a former student of the University for Theatre and Film Arts, in short SZFE. And Nóra has a crucial role in the fight for the autonomy of SZFE. Certainly, I would like to ask her to tell us a few words on her exact role and position in the case of SZFE. But before I pass the floor to Nóra, let me to tell you a few words about our research on this topic. This chapter of the study provides an analysis of the issue of the government invasion disguised as privatization of the University for Theatre and Film Arts, concerning which, in addition to the assessment of the most relevant legal aspects, this chapter also aims to identify the most important conditions and factors both within and without the university community of the unprecedented resistance that has formed against the government's attack. And in the framework of our research, in order to explore the factors of the successful resistance against the government's attack, we conducted interviews with some of the students participating in the resistance. And as a result, it is argued that SZFE students gained the necessary intellectual as well as mental force primarily from experiencing direct democracy or self-determination during education, from the open and socially sensitive mindset passed on by their teachers, from a practice of cooperation and of taking responsibilities acquired at the university, and from the model of their teachers' resistance, and from the support of society. And my question to Nóra are therefore as follows. Do you agree with our assessment, with these results? What do you think? Are there any further factors or key elements of your sustainable resistance? And in this context, what do you think the effect of your fight on the society? To put it simply, what was the secret of your fight?
Thank you very much for your introduction. Good afternoon to everyone, and thank you for letting me be here and talk about my former university. Actually, I'm a former student because I quit SZFE on the 15th of February, so in the middle of my my studies as a television production student. Yes, and went to another university, but I continue the fight for our autonomy in a free SZFE society. Just I with actually our whole class of television production quit the studies because of the change of model that I would like to talk about because of the loss of our autonomy at our university. But first, let me just quickly reflect on the question, because I highly agree with most of the points that you raised of what helped us really be effective in this way of resisting, because we could have not done it without a democratic institution that was behind us, or that we were part of it. SZFE is a very small university. It's community-based. It's very open. It's very direct. We know everything that happens in the school, and that's why we were very much informed from point zero that the change of model is going to happen to our university. As you know, it just sweeps throughout the country, the change of model. Every university has to go through it. It's right now, I think 7 or 8, that's still a state university. And when we first heard of it, it was like about February. And I would spare your time with the whole timeline, because it would be a long conversation to know what has actually happened. And I would like to break it down into 4 key points, where it was a crucial element of rule of law that we strived for, and we did not get it. And I would like to tell you how it led to civil disobedience. That was the occupation of our university at the very last element. So first of all, when they introduced that there will be a law that changes our model, we were not consulted, so we were not part of the legislative procedure. There were some meetings, that like 2 or 3, and for example, one time the student delegation was invited, and the ministry just refused all of our claims. That included that the Senate have to maintain their rights, that we have to be in direct connection with the appointment of director, and just the normal powers of the Senate, the normal autonomy guarantees that we had as a state university. So that was the legislative process, and ultimately it led to a law in July that really has absolutely no guarantees of autonomy and just hands over full control to a private entity, a 5-member board of trustees. It's a so-called private foundation, but it's really state-funded. So what actually happened is that the ministry just passed on all of its powers to this body, this board of trustees. We really fought after the law was open, after the law was in effect, that I just want to highlight that in every stage we started out with good faith. So when the law, as in its form, which we think is unconstitutional, came into effect, we said that, okay, we have this law, so now our good faith-based argument is that the Senate wants to send and elect 3 persons out of the 5 members of the board. So the ministry can appoint 2 and the Senate can appoint 3. We had a whole check system of how we would like to elect these people. We had 13 people that could have been elected as candidates, and we presented it to the ministry. It was just a very they were highly classified people that could have been part of this board. Of course, the ministry just refused all of our claims, and it directly appointed 5 members who had no previous connection to our university. So that was the second phase. The third phase was September 1st, August 31, the famous night that changed the university, because that's when the 5-membership board of trustees just presented us the deed of foundation and the new internal rules. It could have done so because the Act on Higher Education has a passage from 2019 when it lets actually private universities to take away the powers of the Senate. It's an option. It's not mandatory, but it's an option there. So actually, our good faith argument was that the school and our lawyers wrote a deed of foundation and an internal rules that would have maintained the rights of the Senate, even if it's a board of trustees, even if it's change of model, we could have still maintained our rights. We presented it to the ministry, and really just 2 days, 3 days later, they just handed us back their own version that ripped all of the rights away from our Senate. So when that happened, our Senate resigned because it lost all of our powers. That included the right to elect director, the right to just articulate the internal rules that really means which power belongs to whom, and to the financial planning and every real powers. So it was a powerless Senate. The only reasonable deed was to resign. So our Senate did that, and in that night there was a big demonstration at our university that turned into overnight, and that was the night when we occupied the university. And that's what I would like to really highlight here, that in every previous stages we tried to maintain a good faith and maintain that, okay, there is a change of model, but we can still be autonomous. We could have been still autonomous in every step of the way, but with every measure, they took away our rights. And that's when civil disobedience comes in, when there was no other way to resist in a legally acceptable way, so-called. But I would like to highlight that even though with civil disobedience, we have to disrespect some rules, we only do it so because this disrespect goes to those unconstitutional rules that are, for example, in the Act of Higher Education, but mostly in our own law that came into effect in July and that changed our university. So I would really highlight that we fight for democracy, we fight for academic freedom with our previous democratic structure and our previous community, And really all we want to do is reach academic freedom and institutional autonomy. And this is a very pure goal we really maintained throughout today, just a politically free attitude, just concentrating on the rights that we used to have and that the university no longer has anymore. And it was really when, there was a time when I attended law school and SZFE at the same time. And then I finished law school earlier, and I came back September to the Theatre and Film Arts University and tried to see what we can do here with the powers of law. And a lot of good lawyers helped us and still help us. And also the Institute has provided us with great articles and the great reasoning that we still continue to use, for example, in our numerous cases that are in front of the courts. And really the question also was in our community that can we rely on law in a country where rule of law is really highly questionable, in a state that we really cannot just be guaranteed that our democratic rights will be upheld. But every time we agreed throughout the forums, because as it was mentioned, we continue to maintain our direct democratic forums, which really consist on every occasion is throughout like 5 or 6 hours. So it's a very tiring process, but also we believe that this is the only way, and to fight for democracy, we have to be democratic. I don't say that direct democracy is for everyone, because you have to be very dedicated for that, but it's a very effective way of decision making. And that's what led us to believe in the legal way, in fighting for our rights with law. And that's when I want to switch to my next topic, which is what we have reached already. And I think that I would like to also get back to judicial independence, because I strongly believe that there is a part of judicial independence that we can, that civil society or autonomous institutions can strengthen throughout participating. Because the way we just kept filing actions, actually we reached to a state where right now I can tell that the Capital Regional Court of Budapest has actually turned to the Constitutional Court 2 times already. One, questioning the constitutionality of our law from July, and the second time, but it's not as official that you cannot read the actual judicial reasoning, but we know that one of our action is suspended because of the governmental decree that let the Board of Trustees just ban the education. So it's also in front of the Constitutional Court to decide on it. And of course, I would like to mention that we turn to the Constitutional Court, the university citizens, but we all know that in that case, the Constitutional Court does not have a time limit, so it can do what it did in the case of Central European University, so as to not decide. But what the Capital Regional Court does is intervene with our action that is in front of it, and it actually just highlighted what we have said in our own filing to the Constitutional Court. And now I can say very gladly that at 19th of May, the Constitutional Court has to decide on our case. It has to decide if our change of model was constitutional or not, and it has to just nullify the law if it was unconstitutional. And really, what we are asking for is the Constitutional Court to keep in respect, to respect its own ruling of 2005, mainly when it said that a governing body has to consist of those that are the holders of the autonomy of the institution, that are teachers and students, which mainly is the Senate. So when the Senate is ripped from its rights, it's really just the loss of institutional autonomy. So we are waiting for that time, 19th of May, and until then, we have like several lawsuits. I can go on and forth from all day long, but that wouldn't be nice with you. So I would also say another result, which is very surprising, because maybe you wouldn't call it a result, but I think it is, that that the government had to appoint István Stumpf, who was an earlier judge of the Constitutional Court, to a so-called commissioner on the change of model. And the official reasoning was in his appointment was that he has to address the constitutional dilemmas of the change of model. And I think it's directly emerged from our resistance that is still going forth. And right now that we don't occupy the university, it is not very visual, it is not very visible that we are resisting. But now is the time for the law to take effect. From all of the filing that we did in October, September, and November, they are coming to effect now because mechanisms of the judiciary work slowly, but they work. Not in every case, I wouldn't say that, because we have lost some of our cases. It's a numerous amount, but in those that we are winning, and there is one actually that we already won against the educational authority, and it has to redo its own ruling. It's very exciting for us, and we will do a press release about it next week. So really, you are the ones who first hear that. And what is really in our way of today, because really people cannot see us now. And we lost one thing that you mentioned in the study, that is the support of the people with their day-to-day contact. It was very much for us, it represented a lot, and we get a lot of strength from that. We don't have that now, but what we have now is also European institutions. For example, Fundamental Rights Agency contacted us and keeps contacting us to keep informed how our situation is going. And for example, we had to tell them that, well, 3 times our education was banned. And because of the suspensory effect, that also we can thank to the Capital Court of Budapest. They gave us 3 times suspensory effect against the banning of our education. And the Board of Trustees kept just doing that. So it was like a domino effect, but we just keep fighting to it. And I just have to mention my last point is to all of the other universities, because this commissioner that I mentioned, István Stumpf, his reasoning is that only in the case of SZFE has it turned this bad. Well, it had to, because we were the ones who could resist. We are watching closely the other universities and their struggle in Szeged and Pécs, and they had to fight for a Senate hearing to be open and public, and to get them to know what is going on in their universities. How can you organize anything if you are not capable of knowing what is going on? It's impossible, and they know that. And this is why the senates of the universities keep voting for the change of model, with letting everyone outside of the decision. So just keep going back to, if there is a democratic tradition in an institution, if subsidiarity is really working, then the government can be as harsh as it can. There is always a will to fight in the community, because there is power in communities. Thank you very much.
Nóra, thank you. It was really exemplary notion, and as a last speaker, you just gave us an example for behavior, how to cope with the lack of democratic environment based on democratic traditions. My question, but is a poetic question, that in a country level, how to cope with the authoritarian temptation without long democratic traditions. But it's really a good point, because you just summarized our intentions here with saying that you used judges, used law, used legal profession to help the freedom fighters, and used openness of the media, the remaining media, for organizing public support. So it's really an example of a free little society. We are now beyond every limit, but I must ask you in this little circle that if anybody has any comments or questions at last, just free feel. Yeah, Miklós.
Thank you very much. I think Nóra had a crucial word. She uttered actually the word that is the solution, which is civil disobedience in my mind. Because if you consider the system that is being built in Poland and in Hungary, the illiberal system, whatever name you choose for it, it is a purposefully built system to create conditions to which, if you keep to those constraints that they are built, if you keep those legal environment in mind and you adjust to it, then you cannot change it. That's the actual essence of this type of system. And it is built as much on phony legality, formal legality, as inertia of the participants and the unpreparedness of the participants to meet this very special challenge that you are confronted with rules to which you keep and you then cannot change everything. While democracy's basic definition is the type of government that you can change, right? And you cannot. So that's the essence of the whole thing. Therefore, civil disobedience is the end of our thinking. And my question to the lawyers in our panel, to the lawyers, that is our fate that if Nóra's hope is not fulfilled, and those different bodies and courts and others cannot solve our situation because they operate on the basis of adjustment to the created legal environment by the illiberal, purposefully illiberal state building, nation state building, then we have to fall back to inertia? Or is it then a legal environment under building by freedom-loving lawyers, which would justify civil disobedience according to the comportment, to the special environment of each profession? Nóra and her lot showed it in academic setting. The parties now are preparing kind of, although they always fall back to go back to the scenery of the phony, totally inexistent parliament, but nevertheless, they are preparing for something that could be called disobedience to normal illiberal rules. But finally, if we have to fall back to acquiescence to the created phony legal environment, then what can legal lawyers give us as a plus to resistance? So I believe that if a governmental change somehow in this artificial way by the bonding together of parties that in a normal democracy would fight each other can be created, then a moment comes where there will be no excuse for our society and for our legal society if they wouldn't back the essence of what civil disobedience is, non-violent revolution, in fact. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Miklós, for this big question. But I think this question is the topic of the next workshop. But if somebody, I have some final sentences for that, for reflecting that. But if somebody else wants to answer it, or it's open question. So I really think that lawyers must help freedom fighters, and there are some very important judicial decisions which Nóra mentioned, and it's really hopeful that there are some judges who are actively have some serious comments and concerns about the judicial independence, even international scenes. So and there are some journalists who are constantly fighting for freedom of and independence of journalism, media. And there are some civil societies which are very active in fighting against the authoritarian state. But your question is much broader. Your question concerns the future, because if this kind of authoritarian state pressures are growing, there will be a point where freedom fighters and lawyers and other professionals must cooperate with each other in the name of the freedom and in the name of the rule of law and democracy. So it's building democracy and the rule of law, as you know, because you were the member of the previous democracy making process. It's not only a legal issue, it's a social issue and a political issue, and lawyers have and always had in the history a remarkable and important role, but without cooperation of journalists, without cooperation of even teachers and medical staffs and artists and civil actors, it is hopeless. So I think we are in a point now where we can learn from each other how to cooperate, how to communicate with each other, how to cope with the problems of our own, and how to help to cope with the others' problems. So it's a kind of a learning process. The paradox is that we are running out of time, because it's more than 10 years is too much for a life in society, and our life is too short for waiting a new democratic turn. We must make it.
Bravo.
So I think it was a long but very interesting discussion, and I myself learned a lot from it. Probably technically I learned that we must or we should organize another a panel for the future and for the brighter rule of law Hungarian epoch, and please help us in this fight. And we really appreciate your presence and activity in this panel. And next time, I hope we will be able to meet physically in the very next future. So we will continue this process, and that was only the starting point now.
Thank you very much.
So thank you for your presentation, for your discussion, and for your activity here. And be cautious with this terrible health problems, and we see each other soon.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.